Simon Cowell. The name alone brings to mind sharp critiques, raised eyebrows, and the power to turn nobodies into global icons. But behind the smirk in the millions lies a story darker and more fragile than the world ever saw. From a neglected childhood to humiliating failures, from public scandals to near-death accidents, Simon's life reads less like a fairy tale and more like a survival saga. The man who once judged everyone now finds himself judged by fate, tragedy, and time itself. This is not the story of TV's harshest critic. This is the story of his scars. Long before the lights of Hollywood or Saturday night television, Simon Cowell was a boy no one seemed to notice. Born in 1959 in London, he grew up in a household that glittered from the outside but carried silent fractures inside. His father, Eric, was successful but stern, and Simon would later confess that he never once heard him say, "I'm proud of you." That absence carved scars deeper than he realized. His mother, Julie, was elegant but emotionally distant. At school, Simon clashed with teachers, struggled with academics, and left with only a handful of qualifications. Friends remembered him as restless and defiant, not brilliant. Invisible to teachers, overlooked by classmates, he learned early what rejection felt like. Later in life, he admitted that the ache of being unseen never truly left him. When his father placed him in the EMI music mailroom, it wasn't pride, it was pity. Simon sorted mail for stars who filled stadiums while he remained nameless in the shadows. Quietly, he cried in bathrooms, convinced life had peaked too soon. But humiliation planted a seed. The boy invisible to the world decided he would one day force it to look at him. By the early 1980s, Simon had clawed his way into the industry, launching Fanfare Records. For a fleeting moment, success felt within reach. The label scored a hit with So Macho, and suddenly Simon was visible. The parties, the champagne, the illusion of belonging. But the market is merciless, trends shifted, contracts collapsed, and by the late 80s, Fanfare was nothing but ashes. Friends vanished, creditors circled. Simon, barely in his 30s, returned to his parents' house, sleeping in the same childhood bedroom that once echoed with loneliness. To the world, it was a failed business venture. To Simon, it was humiliation on a personal scale. Rumors swirled in industry circles. He's finished, he'll never recover. Even close acquaintances later admitted they thought his career was over. Simon himself would confess, "That time nearly broke me." But instead of destroying him, the collapse hardened him. He studied not just music, but the machinery of fame. What sold, what connected, what made audiences feel. Fanfare didn't end his story. It reforged his philosophy. He would no longer chase prestige. He would chase connection, even if critics mocked him for it. The man who returned to the business wasn't naive. He was ruthless. Back at BMG in the 1990s, Simon swallowed his pride and began again. He signed acts others dismissed as disposable. Robson and Jerome 5, Westlife. Industry insiders sneered. They weren't credible. They weren't artistic. But Simon didn't care. He wasn't chasing the approval of critics. He was chasing the heartbeat of the crowd. And the crowd delivered. Millions of albums sold, chart after chart topped. While music journalists scoffed, Simon laughed all the way to the bank. Rumors spread that industry elites hated him, not because he failed, but because he was succeeding where they couldn't. He had cracked the code, connection over perfection. Still, victory came with bitterness. Simon admitted he often lay awake, terrified it could all collapse again. The memory of bankruptcy haunted him. Every success felt fragile, every contract a lifeline he might lose. But from those anxieties came clarity. He began to see fame itself as a product, packaged, marketed, sold. And Simon Cowell was not content to stay behind the curtain. He was preparing for a stage far bigger than boardrooms. Soon the world would no longer just hear his artists. They would hear him, and television would never be the same. When Pop Idol debuted in 2001, Simon Cowell wasn't expected to be the star. He was blunt, sharp-tongued, even cold. Producers worried viewers would hate him. Instead, they loved him. His refusal to sugarcoat failure was electrifying in a world used to polite lies. Pop Idol became a cultural phenomenon. American Idol, which launched in 2002, turned him into a household name. Millions tuned in not just to watch singers, but to hear Simon's verdict. His eyebrow raise, his withering silences, his brutal honesty became iconic. What critics called cruelty, audiences saw as truth. But behind the cameras, rumors swirled. Producers allegedly begged him to soften his tone, fearing backlash. Tabloids painted him as television's villain. Simon didn't care. He embraced the role, knowing controversy was its own currency. By mid-decade, the X Factor and Got Talent exploded worldwide. At his peak, more than 600 million people watched formats stamped with his name. The press crowned him the most powerful man in television. But power isolates. As Simon himself admitted, I knew people hated me, but I couldn't pretend to be someone I wasn't. The throne he sat on brought glory and loneliness. In 2013, Simon's carefully built empire cracked. News broke that he was expecting a child with Lauren Silverman, the wife of his close friend Andrew. Overnight, headlines screamed betrayal. Paparazzi swarmed. The man who judged everyone suddenly became the one being judged. Andrew Silverman filed for divorce. Friends turned their backs. Rumors spread that Simon was spiraling, humiliated by the betrayal narrative. In one rare moment of candor, he admitted, "It was not something I'm proud of." For a man obsessed with control, it was the most powerless moment of his life. But from chaos came rebirth. In February 2014, Simon held his son Eric for the first time. The scandal faded into the background as fatherhood redefined him. Associates recalled a transformed man. The mogul who once barked orders now read bedtime stories. Tabloids speculated that Eric had softened him permanently. Fans noticed too. The once ruthless judge began showing flashes of warmth, even vulnerability, on screen. The scandal left scars, but it also saved him from himself. For the first time, Simon's world wasn't about ratings. It was about a little boy who called him dad. Simon knew professional highs, but personal losses cut deeper. In '99, his father Eric passed away before he ever saw Simon's global success. Simon confessed that regret haunted him. The man whose approval he chased hardest never got to witness his triumph. In 2015, tragedy struck again. His mother, Julie, died at 89. To the world, it seemed natural. To Simon, it was devastation. She had been the anchor in his turbulent youth, the quiet witness to his rise. When she passed, Simon stepped away from the X Factor, retreating into grief that stripped him of his trademark armor. Rumors spread that he nearly quit television altogether, telling close friends he felt empty. For someone who thrived on applause, the silence after her passing was unbearable. These losses carved fragility into the man once seen as invincible. Viewers noticed a shift. The sharp wit remained, but so did pauses, flickers of vulnerability when family was mentioned. Behind the empire builder was simply a son, one who had lost both parents. For Simon, grief wasn't a chapter. It was a scar that still shaped every smile, every silence, and every moment of reflection. In August 2020, Simon tested a new electric bike outside his Malibu home. 1 second of miscalculation shattered his back in multiple places. Hours of surgery, a steel rod in his spine, and a terrifying confession followed. I came within a minute of not making it. The man who once controlled empires couldn't even sit up without agony. Headlines speculated whether he'd ever return to TV. Behind the closed doors, Simon feared his son would lose him too soon. I thought of Eric, and I knew I had to fight, he admitted later. After months of recovery, just as strength returned, fate struck again. In 2022, another e-bike accident left him with a broken arm and bruised face. This time, tabloids mocked him. Memes branded him reckless and fragile. For a man who thrived on control, it was psychological torment. Rumors swirled that his health was deteriorating, that he was weaker than he let on. Simon denied it, but the accidents forced him to slow down. The near-death experiences changed him. They weren't just accidents. They were reminders. Power, fame, money, all meaningless if you can't stand, walk, or hold your child. If the accident stripped Simon of control, cosmetic surgery stripped him of identity. Years of Botox and fillers left his face stiff, swollen, almost unrecognizable. Fans and tabloids mocked him mercilessly. What happened to Simon Cowell's face? Blared headlines. Memes flooded the internet. The irony was brutal. The man who made a career out of judging appearances was now judged by his own. Simon eventually admitted, I went too far. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. That confession marked a turning point. He stopped treatments, let age show, and embraced authenticity over illusion. But the transformation went deeper than looks. Simon began speaking of legacy, not empire, not wealth, but values. He announced that his fortune, estimated at over $600 million, would not go to Eric. Instead, it would fund charities for children, education, and healthcare. Fans debated the decision. Some called it noble, others cruel. But for Simon, it was clarity. The ruthless judge had softened into a mentor, a philanthropist, a father intent on leaving impact over inheritance. His empire still stood, but his priorities shifted. Simon Cowell no longer wanted to be remembered for ratings. He wanted to be remembered for resilience. Simon Cowell's life is not just a story of power. It is a story of scars. Personal, physical, and emotional. From a neglected child to a failed entrepreneur, from scandals to survival, from near death to ridicule, Simon has lived through storms that fame could never shield him from. But perhaps that is why his legacy feels more human now than ever. He judged others, yes, but life judged him harder, forcing him to confront his own flaws, regrets, and mortality. And through it all, he learned what truly matters. Today, Simon is not the untouchable mogul of the 2000s. He is a father who measures success in bedtime stories, a philanthropist who believes legacy belongs to the world, and a survivor who has endured enough pain to understand empathy. For viewers, his story is a reminder. Wealth fades, fame withers, health falters, but love, resilience, and purpose endure. Simon Cowell built empires, but in the end, his greatest achievement may be the courage to be human. And now I'll leave you with a question. What will your legacy be?